Welcome to Outrage Science Bites. I'm your host, David Beckmeyer, and today we're closing out our week on the psychology of polarization with a very important topic, building bridges. We spent this week unpacking the science behind our toxic political environment, and now it's time to explore some solutions. In this episode, we'll hear from experts who are deeply involved in efforts to overcome polarization, both here in the U.S. and around the world. While there's no magic fix, there are strategies we can use to move toward a less divided and more connected society. Let's start with our first expert, James Cone, who gives us an important reminder that in this battle against polarization, there are no silver bullets.
I don't think we should be looking for silver bullets here. So trying to say, is something a panacea is not the greatest question. None of this is a panacea, right? But some can be more important than others and have different roles.
We shouldn't be looking for a single solution or a quick fix to polarization. Instead, we need to recognize that this is a complex issue and different strategies will have different levels of effectiveness depending on the context. It's about understanding the variety of tools we have at our disposal and being willing to use them even if no one option will solve everything. This sets the stage for our next expert, Jonathan Stray, who discusses how strategies used in violent international conflicts are now being applied to our own political divisions here in the U.S. He explains that the tools to address polarization already exist, we just need to put them to work.
So what we're seeing with the bridge building organizations is in part this principle that has been used in violent places in the world brought back into the US. And in fact, there's a shift in personnel and resources. So many of the people who worked internationally on this stuff are now coming back to the US, those who were Americans, of course, and saying, well, we need to apply some of these principles here. I guess what I'm really trying to say is that we, as humanity, know something about this, right? We know we don't have to scratch our heads and start from zero and say, "Gosh, how do we come at this?" Because there are people who's have been doing this for a very long time. It's just a question of getting that stuff applied in this country and appropriately resourcing it.
We often forget that the challenge of overcoming division isn't unique to the United States. People have been successfully bridging divides in deeply divided societies around the world. Experts who have worked on these problems internationally are now turning their attention inward, bringing that experience home. But as Stray reminds us, it's not enough to have the knowledge, we also need the resources and the commitment to apply these solutions right here at home. Now, one of the things that makes polarization so entrenched is the pressure to conform within political and social groups. Jonathan Stray discusses how individuals with mixed ideologies are particularly powerful in bridge-building efforts. Let's listen to how he explains the role of those who can cross boundaries and build understanding between different communities.
If you are active in politics, you're going to be under pressure from your friends. You're going to be at a dinner party and you're going to say, well, here's how I think about climate change, and everybody's going, yeah, okay, yeah. And then you're going to say, here's what I think about gun control, and people are going to be like, that you monster, how could you? So part of the reason that we align is that there's conformance pressure to do so. But holding that sort of mixed ideology is powerful. It is work. It means you are one of those people who's building bridges in a bunch of ways, who can, really articulate the other side of other issues, who is capable of moving between communities potentially. And that's what we want. We need people who are sort of cross-cut the conflict in various ways. That's one of the fundamental ways that you hold societies together, is you actually have this sort of diverse set of alliances and networks.
People who don't fit neatly into one political box can be incredibly valuable. They can navigate between groups, create dialogue, and help foster understanding. But it's also not easy. There's pressure from all sides to conform, and that makes it hard for these bridge builders to operate. Still, these individuals are a crucial part of the solution because they challenge the binary us versus them mentality. Our next clip from Zachary Elwood ties into this idea by addressing the emotional side of polarization, specifically the role of anger. As we know, emotions can drive people apart, and Elwood explains how anger fuels ideological divides, making it even harder for people to find common ground.
Our anger isn't just something that's off to the side of the issue stances that we have, the issue stances that we're mad at the other side about. For example, our anger is a direct part of the equation, and there's plenty of studies that back up the idea that where our anger is basically amplifying, the ideological divide too, where it's like, there's one study that shows like the more us versus them anger people had, predicted how extreme their COVID stances would be, right? So that, on both sides, so that there's this, it's acting as sort of a wedge, and the interesting thing about, we tend to think like, in a war, attacking the other side, helps defeat them. But as Jonathan Haidt put it recently in a video, he said something like, culture wars are different because the more you attack the other side, the stronger you make them. So it's like, I think the thing that most people don't understand about why we should really work towards depolarization is that our us versus them anger is directly helping fuel, the most extreme people on the other side, on our side. It's a fuel that we create, and if you fully recognize that, you can see how there are ways to work towards any political goal you want while removing the anger. And if you do that, you're going to end up with a much more sane and rational public debate. You're going to end up with more negotiations that, make everybody equally unhappy or happy. It just creates a saner world. But the more you inject this kind of like dehumanizing, like, the other side are these moral monsters that we really can't understand. You're just adding fuel to the fire, basically.
Anger not only exacerbates ideological differences, but also encourages more extreme and irrational stances. It's a vicious cycle. The more we dehumanize the other side, the more they harden against us, making any chance of understanding nearly impossible. If we can learn to temper our anger and avoid falling into the trap of vilifying those we disagree with, we can create space for more productive conversations. And that's really what building bridges is all about, creating that space for dialogue, for understanding, and ultimately for solutions. As James Cone reminded us earlier, there's no one-size-fits-all fix here. Instead, it's going to take a combination of efforts, from applying proven strategies used in international conflicts, to supporting those who navigate between political tribes, to reducing the anger that drives so much of our division. As we wrap up our week on the psychology of polarization, let's keep these lessons in mind. None of this is easy, but with the right tools, resources, and commitment, we can start building bridges toward a less polarized world. Thank you for listening to Outrage Science Bites. I'm your host, David Beckmeyer, and I'll see you next time as we continue exploring the science behind our outrage-filled world.